Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading for Friday, August 20th, 2021. Posting again on a Saturday. I have had a bit of a week, or at least a couple of events that stood out a bit. The biggest ones being on Thursday. I started the day not by going to work, because I work on site, but I went to the doctor's office. And I was going through my annual exam, and she was asking if I was working remotely or not, and I explained I can't for my job and that I am in fact working on Capitol Hill and have for the past year. And so of course she asked, oh, were you there for the January 6th events, the insurrection? And I said I wasn't because my sister had heard some things and, demanded I stay home. And so I did, and I missed the excitement of, sheltering in place and being evacuated on that day. So we went through the exam, and then I left for work. I got onto the metro, heading for my usual stop, which is Capitol South, but it turns out the train driver said that they were skipping that stop, and I said, that's weird. I guess maybe minor police work. I'll just go one more stop and I can walk easily to work from there. And I'm getting off at the next stop, which is Eastern Market, and I just pick up my phone and I see that my old college roommate has texted me. And the text very clearly says, Rachel, are you at work? Are you okay? And I'm like, oh crap. Not just a minor incident after all. And that's when I checked the news and saw that there was a truck parked right in front of the Library of Congress, which is also very near to the U.S. Capitol and the Supreme Court, and it was considered a threat, and the nearby buildings were being evacuated. So yeah, I did not mean for that conversation with the doctor to be foreshadowing, but I found myself waiting a few blocks away at Eastern Market on the phone with my supervisor and checking in with the people under me too to see what was going to happen, because like for a couple minutes it was like, oh, maybe we'll just wait outside in the evacuee zones and then go back in. But then a few minutes later my supervisor called back and said, nope, we're all going home. So that was my Thursday. Luckily, on the grand scale, it didn't make as much of a splash. Certainly very few people even noticed that anything was going on, because it turned out that it was one man who was making bomb threats and like streaming on Facebook Live from his car, and it took several hours for the police to sort of, coax him out to get arrested without incident, but other than that, there was no lasting threat, very unlike the insurrection and just how massive that was and continues to be. But in case you're curious, I'll link a news story down below. And with that, I will get into the meat of this video and talk about my week in reading, where things were a lot more even keel. Starting with my months-long tradition now of reading and discussing a short story in this collection of Dorothy Parker's completed set. This week I read The Sexes, which was published in 1927. It's another one of her kind of dashed-off pieces about a conversation between two people. It's really just, that's what the story is. It's a conversation between two people, which is meant to comment on a social issue of some sort, and in this case it very much is about the ways that men and women of her time, and I would argue even of our time, even in the West, are conditioned to a certain extent now, and certainly then, I would assume. I'm getting a little passive-aggressive already, and that's sort of the point here, is that we have this conversation between a man and a woman, a young man and a young woman, and the man is asking direct questions and getting very flustered because the woman is always deferring and saying, like, not giving a direct opinion about anything, and always saying, oh, I wouldn't want to assume, and you should do what you want, and I don't want to put you out. And, that frustrates him, I suppose, because he's been conditioned to be a lot more direct, and she's been conditioned to defer and to always be agreeable. And when she does have disagreements, which she does express a few a year, she does so in a passive-aggressive way of still trying to be, you know, nice and polite. And so when he's saying, "Are you sore at me? Are you sore at me?" she'd be like, "Oh, I don't know what you mean. Oh, heavens." But then she'd say something passive aggressive. So, you know, and I feel like I would hope in a way that she's not being too judgmental even of the woman, because it very much obviously is about conditioning and how this woman was raised, that she has to behave and can't actually state her direct opinions. And maybe this little ditty can show that it can be amusing but frustrating, and that maybe everybody should be more direct. I don't know, maybe that's my takeaway. It certainly would make things go a little bit smoother. Although I will note that the event that finally brought them together for a little bit is when, you know, the woman is passive-aggressively charging this man with the idea that he spent the last party they were at talking to this other woman. And he goes on a tear about, "Oh no, she's not interesting at all, and it's all about you." And it's like, oh, of course, you know, you bond over, you know, denigrating another woman. But, you know, I guess that's really another social commentary that is part of this piece. Next, I finished Postcards from the Edge by Carrie Fisher, which I picked up due to the page 112 tag I did last week. I feel like I should say that the end kind of roped back to the beginning, even though, for the most part, this book is a series of vignettes about Fisher's sort of alter ego's life, like starting with Suzanne Vale as she is in rehab, but then also following her on set of her movies and into her social interactions and working out and all of that. But some of the last little vignette sections harken back to, I thought, one of the most memorable characters I talked about a bit in my last Friday Reads video. A young guy she was in rehab with, who actually we got to see through his eyes as he was going on a drug binge and justifying it, and I just thought it was a really good bit of writing. And of course, one of the things he was talking about on his drug binge was, "Oh my, I have this wonderful idea to talk about a guy who goes to rehab and the experiences he has, but oh, first I need to, you know, take these drugs to, you know, get in the right headspace and, you know, yada yada," and it spirals from there. And I assumed, of course, nothing would come of this, right? But I should have known better that, in fact, this drug-addled guy, who I thought was pretty young and, like, was, you know, focused on his parents a lot, and his parents were, like, you know, encroaching on his life, so he said. I thought he was relatively young and unsuccessful, but by the end of the book, he did in fact write a television pilot for his rehab stint, and he called Suzanne out of the blue to ask if she would play the main part, which he wrote for her, and of course was a self-absorbed depiction of his opinion of Suzanne at the rehab. But, you know, that comes with the territory, and she ends up not doing it, but it, you know, turns into the fact that he does come back into the story, and I guess that's interesting enough. In a way, the ending was a little flattening, I almost want to say. I mean, it's a happy ending. She meets this really nice sounding kind of guy who wrote a novel that was about to be turned into a movie, and she meets him like on the set of a talk show where they're both, you know, well, I think her friend is being interviewed, and then he's about to be interviewed, and so they meet in the green room, and they end up married at the end, and it seems like they have a somewhat quiet little happy marriage, which is, I feel like, a little bit of a change of pace from a lot of the rest of it, which in a way maybe makes sense then for why she might be happy settling down with this guy in particular. Although I know that Fisher decided to go back to the Suzanne Vale character in a sequel based off of experiences she had later in life with the father of her daughter, who turned out to be gay. And like, it's, I know a big part of her shtick of, he forgot to tell me he was gay, and I forgot to notice he was gay, and all of that. So she goes back to that with Suzanne Vale in a sequel. So it almost feels like Austin Powers in a way. This feels like kind of a neat little ending. But I think we're going to go back to some saucier bits again in the sequel, I suppose. Not sure if I will get to that, but I am glad I read this one. The next book I finished on audio, which is The Hidden Palace by Helene Wecker. I don't think this really shows up, but maybe it will. I don't know. This is historical fantasy and also a sequel to an earlier title from 2015, The Golem and the Jinni, which made a bit of a splash at the time, I believe. And so she decided to go on. When I first read that book, I didn't think it needed a sequel, but as I said in my last video, I've changed my tune, or at the very least, I've really enjoyed what she put down in this book, which takes place at the turn of the 20th century for about 15 years, starting in 1900 to then, World War I. We're primarily in New York City, although some of the book also takes place in the Middle East. And we are following supernatural characters, a golem of Ashkenazi Jewish lore and a jinni of Middle Eastern lore who find themselves living on the streets of New York at the turn of that century. And we're also following a bunch of their neighbors and people whose lives they impact. And we get to see into communities, particularly the Ashkenazi Jewish immigrant community and the Little Syria community of people from Syria. And I'm not sure what else I can say that I didn't say last time, really, especially since, you're getting more and more into spoilers the more you go into a book. But to reiterate, I loved it. I really did. I feel like the characters are compelling, and Wecker has such a focus, I think, on empathy and on camaraderie and coming together, which I guess really sticks out, especially because the golem and the jinni are so stereotypically like badass sort of characters, mostly known for being monstrous or, powerful, and there's a bit of danger they bring, in fact, to the story because of their supernatural powers. But really, the focus is far less on like if they're dangerous or monstrous, and more about who they are as, I want to say people, even though they're not technically people, but, they do represent, I think, certain traits about, like, passion and being unrestrained and lustful in the jinni's way, and also hugely empathetic to a fault of being empathic for the golem, in fact, because that's really what would compel a golem to massive acts of violence, is being compelled by wanting to protect someone or a group of someone's. And then the actual human characters, of course, also go on human journeys about who they are and what they want and what they need. And there's another golem and another jinni, in fact, who we meet also in this story. I do think there are some convenient meetings and plot points between these characters themselves, and also between the characters and more significant characters or significant history, like, someone meeting up with Lawrence of Arabia, or, drowning on the Titanic or something, which, that always sticks out to me as, of course you have to touch upon the major events, but most people, of course, in their lives don't have dealings with these major events. But then again, I guess if you have an excuse to tell a noteworthy story in that regard, it would be in such a tale as this, which is about supernatural creatures. And another theme of the book, in fact, which really she started very early in the book and then continued till the end, is the types of stories we tell ourselves, and how, they gain wings and become bigger than they started out as, and the types of spin you put on them comes down to the types of biases you have about what happened in them, and like who you might side with, or if you want to be more empathetic perhaps and side with everyone. At least that was my takeaway, because certainly throughout this book, where Wecker changed POVs a lot, we get to see a lot of different sides of events and see how, everybody has a decent perspective, and or at least an understandable one, even if they're not as likable of characters. Which is a little bit of a change, as I said last week, from her last book, which had a far more black and white antagonist. So yeah, I would very much recommend these two books, and especially this book, which you could read alone. She does put in enough, back story little ticks so that you could know what you need to from the first story if you just read this one. And a final note I'll say is that she obviously did a really impressive amount of research about New York and about the Middle East and the broader world, and it was seamlessly put into the story. It's not dry at all. It's a very compelling story, and it feels very real. So, yes, I'm really glad I read this. Now I am in the middle of another culture-spanning book, except this is realist fiction and contemporary fiction. This is Motherland by Leah Franqui, which I actually put on my TBR because it came up on the Jewish Book Council site and I thought it looked interesting. But then I'm getting to it now because my book club, through the local JCC, is reading it this month. So I'm looking forward to talking about this with them at the end of the month when I will have finished it by then. I'm about a third of the way through now. This is a book about a Jewish American woman who grew up in New York and Philadelphia, and she meets an Indian man. Their names are Rachel and Drew, and they have a very whirlwind romance and then decide to get married, and Drew has a cushy job lined up in Mumbai, and so they move together to Mumbai. This is all like within a year of meeting, the marriage and the move across the world, which Rachel sees as an adventure and a way to sort of get herself out of the doldrums of a job she's not enjoying and a life that feels kind of stagnant. But of course she gets to Mumbai and realizes it's not just a adventure story, and she has to really find her bearings there, especially as a foreign Western woman without the cultural ties, and at a little bit of a disadvantage with her in-laws, especially when her mother-in-law decides to move in with them and decides to leave her husband of 40 years. And from the off, this is about these two women, Rachel and Swati, clashing. And we see from both of their POVs what they're thinking of the other and their cultural biases about what the other person is doing wrong, basically. I do think they're ultimately going to come to some sort of consensus, and I don't think Franqui is trying to say one of them is right and one of them is wrong. But so far from what I've been reading, it's all about, this tension, and they're both very strong-willed, and there's a lot of dialogue back and forth, and just, immediate tension. Like, there's a lot of stuff they're not saying, but they're saying enough and reacting to enough that it is very, like, present and action-y tension, like simmering tension in a way. Yeah, but otherwise I do kind of feel like it's a little exposition heavy, and I feel like, we're thrust in so immediately with these two characters and their, new situation and their conflict that it's like they only came to life as characters, like on the page immediately. If I'm making any sense, I guess I'm just not buying their backstories as much because it is all backstory and exposition-y. So I'm like, you're telling me where these people were coming from to influence where they are now, but it doesn't feel as real. They're, three-dimensionality. I guess I'm having a little trouble with that. I do think I am a little nitpicky, I guess, with literary fiction because I do read a lot of it, so things stick out to me. I also am a little concerned, I guess, about how Swati is coming off. On one end, I kind of appreciate where she's coming from. There's a little bit of hypocrisy for her because she left her husband in part because she saw that her son had, shirked tradition and chosen a love marriage, and then she decided she wanted to get out of her sort of loveless marriage where she felt stagnant and felt like she was sort of just beholden to her husband. And now she had this option of going to live with her son 1,000 miles away because she lived in Kolkata and went to Mumbai to live with her son, who's also making a lot of money and, so forth. But she still holds all of these traditional ideas anyway, still of a woman should be meek and subservient, and there's a caste issue. I think it's a caste issue at play. The fact that she's insistent on servants and wanting people to do things for her, and I know that the caste is a real issue in India, but there's that sense of knowing that Leah Franqui is not an Indian woman, writing about someone who's somewhat entitled in an Indian way. Franqui is, in fact, a American Jewish woman who lives in Mumbai with her Indian-born husband, and so I think a lot of this does come from personal experience or personal research, especially I think with making the city come alive. I am very impressed with the city feeling like a real place. And it turns out, if she herself is to be believed, she did a fair bit of research, because in fact I decided to listen to a podcast with the author. You know, I debate sometimes about doing that, like should I let, you know, her opinion sway my opinion of the book, but then again, why not? You know, it's always interesting to listen to writers talk about their books. So I'll link to the podcast I listened to down below, but as a disclaimer, it's with her editor, so somebody else who has a very vested interest in this book, although I would hope, maybe this is my writer side coming out, but I would hope that an editor who works with a book does have a genuine interest too in what she's working on. And also the editor talked about bringing the manuscript to a sensitivity reader, Indian woman from Mumbai who did like the book. You know, so that's one person's opinion, though, of course. And I like the book, too. I guess I just have that hesitation about Swati so far, even though I don't think she's going to come off as one-dimensionally evil or something like that. I do think it would be something perhaps my book club would talk about, because we have talked a bit about before about sensitivity with writers writing about sensitive cultural subjects. And I guess I'll end with the fact that the main character, Rachel's Judaism, comes in a little bit, but not too much overall. Mostly she's getting used to life in Mumbai, and there's not a lot of Jews in her experience. There are, you know, Jewish groups in India, but she's not having a lot of interaction with them at all, or I think any with those specific groups. One thing that frustrated me about Rachel in the beginning is that even though I think some of her viewpoints come from a sensitive sort of angle, she still wasn't doing anything all that proactive to like learn Hindi or things like that to try to help assimilate that way. But it seems like she's finally starting to go out and meet with an expat group of people, and maybe that'll help ground her a bit in Indian life. We will see as I continue through the book, which I do hope to complete relatively soon, because I have plenty more coming up. And next on the docket will be this one. This is The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles, which I believe is chronicling a young man in the 80s who is dying of AIDS and decides to go home to spend his last moments, perhaps, with his family, which had previously disowned him for being gay, but could be he had nowhere else to go during this time. But that is all I will say about this book right now. Just those quick thoughts, because I am reading this book for the Booktube Prize Finals for 2021. The Booktube Prize was started a couple of years ago by Robert at Barter Hordes, wherein judges judge long lists of books, 48 titles each in nonfiction and literary fiction, and next year translated fiction. And so this is a months-long process. For 2 months we each judge a ballot of 6 books, and then the top 3 of our cumulative judging move on to the next round. And we're in the final round now, and we're judging 6 books, and I'm reading the fiction ballot of 6 books, this being one of them. And so I will judge quietly and not give my opinion until the very end, and Robert will be announcing the winners in October. But in the meantime, if you're interested in the Booktube Prize, I will leave links down below. So that about covers it for me now. I've rambled enough in my intro that I feel like I don't have much more to say. Well, speaking of my JCC book club, one of my events this weekend is that the leader of that book club is having a birthday party at a local beer garden, so I think I will be stopping in for that. It'll be my first time at a beer garden, so what do you know, I do think there's going to be some food there, so that'll be nice. I'm not much of a beer drinker otherwise. And yeah, you can find me back on this channel in the next few days to do a video on Women in Translation Month, and particularly some of the reading I have done and hope to continue to do for Women in Translation Month this month. So stay tuned. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.